As an asset manager, if you are an asset manager or a lead sponsor or a lead operator, you have the strategic vision of the business plan, right? You write the business plan, and now it's your job to make sure that business plan is being carried out on a day-to-day basis and making sure that there is top-down communication, but also bottom-up communication throughout. You got to remember that as an operator, if you are one, the buck stops with you. It's your duty and responsibility to oversee the implementation of that business plan that you create.
When the weather outside is frightful, your podcasts are delightful. Welcome to part 2 of tracking KPIs for success. If you missed part 1, Michael and I were podcasting on a day where it's raining, and so that's why it's so delightful. No, but seriously, we talked about the key performance indicators that Michael and I track and the importance that they have for viability of the property and how important they are for you as a general partner, as a limited partner, and for the on-site staff, right? How it all comes together. So if you missed that one or want to hear more about it, check out the last episode. But for this one, we are going to talk about KPIs again, but on a different scale and who they are tracked by, right? So this one all focuses on the key performance indicators that are tracked by our property management team, which is why do you not track the same, or how are they different? They are, because there is so much data to track and you can get analysis paralysis, right? With everything, and you're man, how much time do I spend on the data that the PM tracks versus the data that we want tracked? But it all comes together in this really great clap handshake where your fingers cross really tightly, because the CEO of the property management company, she has to make sure her employees are doing well, right? Because if her employees aren't doing well, which is something they also track that has to do with the property, there is a reason for the owners to potentially leave. So they track stuff that is very similar, but very different, or it is similar, but has 2 different meanings all at the same time. And so that's what we're here for today.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate, the importance of tracking key performance indicators or KPIs is really to improve your decision-making, to maximize your profitability, and to just have increased confidence in where the property is or where you can take it, right? So we're not going to get into all of the weeds here. We're just going to go over some high-level KPIs that are tracked by our property management company that we believe are very important to track, right? So if you're out there, if you're an LP or if you're a GP, so a limited partner or general partner, or you have not either one of those yet, right? If you're looking at deals to invest in, right? These are some of the questions you need to be asking the operators, what their property management team is actually tracking.
Yeah. And just also as a general partner, what does your property manager, what are they actually tracking? And even before we break down, the 6 things that we think are super important, I want to bring in a story, right? To bring this all together. A big glimpse was that for one of our properties that Michael and I are not the lead sponsor on, the lead team chose to use a different property management company that Michael and I have used time and time again for no reason other than she was just not in that area yet. Now she is, luckily, and she's also our property manager for that property. But the software that the property management staff was using was really previously was really difficult for me to figure out. And if it's difficult for me to figure out, I can't even imagine how difficult it is for the actual on-site staff to figure out, right? You want to be able to see it and understand it and figure it out quickly. And you want them to be able to do the same. That's a huge importance before we even dive into what they do. If their software is super outdated, very dinosaur-y, kind of reminds you of something that should be on a dial-up, there is a problem with that, right? You want to have a property manager that is adapting with the software that can pull data quickly, that can pull data accurately, and that can just pull data in a sensible manner for other people to read. And react to, right? Because that's the whole point. If you read it, you want to be able to understand what you're actually reading.
Yeah, that was a very stressful time. I mean, it was only a short period of time where that property manager ran there, but man, Susie and I were trying to pull data and information from the software and reports and things like that. And I feel I had to have expert coding knowledge in C or like Python or something like that, right? In order to get the information to display what I wanted to know, like how much income was collected that month, right? Like it wasn't that
tough.
simple, but like it was very, very challenging. So make sure that and test drive the software, take a look at the software that the property management company is using. So because you're going to be looking at that data too, right? And if a property manager doesn't want to show you the software, they don't need to be your property manager.
But also at the same time, like if it's difficult for them to pull up data to give you, like you don't want your property manager wasting hours and hours and hours to find the data. Like I said earlier, like you want it to be efficient. But if it's difficult for them to pull it up, how often do you think they're going to pull it up besides the times that you make them? Like if you want them to be accountable, like in their actions as well, they also have to self-reflect on the numbers that appear on their screen.
Absolutely. So we're going to dive into the 6 KPIs that we think are important that are tracked by our property management company. Now, these are obviously in addition to income, expenses, NOI, things like that. All those standard important KPIs through occupancy and stuff like that we talked about on part 1 of this episode. But we're going to dive into this. So the first one is resident retention rate. So that's important because you need to know, like, is there something going on at the property with the property management company, whether that's the on-site staff or the on-site maintenance personnel? Is there something going on there? There's some kind of disconnect between the residents and the on-site staff that's causing the residents to leave, right? And so you really want to track that. So every time somebody leaves, they ask for, hey, why are you leaving, right?
It's like an exit interview for a job.
It's like an exit interview, exactly, right? And so we want to make sure that they're leaving for things like, oh, we bought a house or, moving out of town or something like that, right? So not, oh, I had a work order open for 60 days and nobody cared that I had water pouring in a gaping hole in my roof, right? So things like that, you want to make sure you're taken care of, right? So that's the first one. The second one is?
So the second one is lease renewal rates, right? Like you want to analyze the trends when the renewal rates are coming up. Like you want to compare to like what other properties are at that are around you to make sure that you're not too high or too low, right? Because if you are too low, you can sometimes get those residents that you don't actually want at your property, depending on, like, a lot goes into that as well. But if it's also too high, that could be a reason why your property is not filling up or the occupancy is not going up higher. And then I know I mentioned this a little bit in our last episode too, but like just discuss the strategies to incentivize renewals. Like you really want the property manager to know the importance of a renewal over a new lease, right? Like with a turnover, a lot of costs come. Like we could only hope that it's as easy as cleaning the carpet and painting the walls, but a lot of times it's not. And so we just want to make sure that the property manager is building a community, right? So that does also come in hand with the resident retention rate. We want to make sure a community is being built and that these people feel like this is a home, right? Because sometimes apartments don't feel like homes. They just feel like kind of, I don't know, just a place to live. But when they feel like they are part of a community and they are cared for and understood and heard, that's when it makes a world of a difference. And that's also where difficult conversations can be easier with the residents, right? Because just an example is that our property managers do quarterly maintenance. And so if it comes to a discussion about like pets that aren't on a lease, people that aren't on a lease, or even just housekeeping issues, when you created this community, it's easier to have these conversations so that you can have resident retention and so that your renewal rates can stay high.
Exactly. Which kind of plays into the third one, which is resident satisfaction surveys. So we're always asking residents, well, at least not us, like the on-site manager, always asking residents, hey, how is it living here? As Susie mentioned, we're always trying to build that community in order to increase those retention rates, right? And so they're very valuable in order to pick out exactly what, hey, is there amenity that's missing, right? That we see a common theme, right? A business center. A lot of the properties that we own, a lot of people don't have printers, for example, right? And so like adding a printer to the business center was a big value add. Yeah, we didn't see an increase in rents specifically, but we might have seen an increase in satisfaction surveys and then therefore resident retention after that.
Yeah, and even like a fun trick, right, to get residents to fill these out because they are pretty valuable. You want to make sure that beyond like Google reviews that you actually know what's happening with the property. But as Michael mentioned, like if you want to implement a new amenity, but you don't know which one will be the best, you could ask. But do a $5 off of rent if you fill out a survey. You will have a lot of surveys filled out. It's amazing how far $5 off of rent for 1 month can go. It's fascinating. Or if you put them into a raffle, it doesn't really matter what the incentive is, but always try to gamify something with the residents if you want something in return.
Absolutely. Talk about the fourth one.
Yeah. So number 4 is maintenance response time. So this is super, super important with resident satisfaction. Like I said before, like being heard and understood is super important. And that goes along with maintenance response times. We want to see what the property management acceptable response time compared to maybe what we think. But then we also want to chat with them about how we can make their time the most efficient when they are at work. Because that's really the big thing too, is like, okay, yes, we have a maintenance man on site, but is he so slow that hiring out is actually more efficient and less expensive? Because at that point, right, like there's a lot that goes into the thinking behind it. But we do want to make sure that the maintenance guys also don't feel, and gals actually, we have both. We don't want them to feel overwhelmed. We don't want them to feel overstressed, but we do want to give them that sense of like leadership in themselves, that they can like be efficient with the property and that they're also proud of this property because of all the work that they put into it, right? And so we just want to make sure that the residents are happy, right? That maintenance requests aren't sitting for a long time, whether that's a couple days or not, but like also the communication that goes with the residents. Like, hey, this is something like we have to order a part. We ordered the part. This is how long it's going to take to get in. Like communication is also super important so that the resident doesn't just feel like the staff has completely forgotten about them.
Absolutely, for sure. And I think that's important to know too, is like, say you have a lot of vacant units that you're also trying to get turned at the same time. Well, the on-site maintenance guy is focusing on turning those units, and we want to make sure that, hey, is there a healthy amount of time being spent turning units and also a healthy amount of time spent on addressing work orders and maintenance requests, right? Another example of that too is like, we have an issue right now with one of the sewer lines under the belly of 2 units, right? This guy kept calling, he's been dealing with it and every time we went to clear the line, it kept getting backed up, right? So he had gurgling backups too. Yeah, we'd go out there, we'd clear out the line, but every time we'd clear it, we started pulling back some mud. So we realized, okay, there's some breaks there, right? And so we've been dealing with this. We thought we would clear it once, see if it got rid of it, came back again, unfortunately. And he's been dealing with this since October, right? And so, but every couple of weeks he was having this issue. And so we've just continued to communicate with him, be very open and honest about like what was going on. It took us a while. We got a couple vendors in there to get some opinions. Some opinions, were going to cost a fortune. Some were not. And so we're kind of trying to figure out what to do in this situation. And now we're progressing forward with coming up with a solution. But I think it all comes down to communication in a sense like that, right? So like, yeah, it's going to take a couple of months for us to get that fixed because it's not a simple, straightforward fix, but we're keeping the line of communication open with the residents, ensuring that they're happy and making sure that if they need anything else during that time.
Yeah. And just one more thing to add, right, before we move on to the next one is that with a lot of Michael and I's, our properties are around like that 100 unit mark. And that does mean that only one maintenance man is on the property because that's what the property like financials can support. And with that, like it can get really hard for some people just working solo. So even coming up with creative ways with your property manager, like CEO or the regional on like maybe how on some days, like you can pull a maintenance guy from another property and like, help with make ready, but then they do the same the other way. And so there's a lot that goes into like, yes, the response time is important, but if the response time isn't great, like digging deep and really figuring out why.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So the fifth one that we're going to discuss is, resident communication and engagement, really. This plays a lot of, just plays into the resident retention rate, resident satisfaction surveys as well. It's just looking at really, what are the residents putting as far as reviews go, right? So looking on Google reviews, on apartments.com, other outlets where residents can leave reviews and making sure that those reviews are addressed, right? What happened? If it's a negative review, make sure it's addressed. If it's a positive review, make sure it's addressed as well, right? Making sure that you and your property management company have control over what reviews are being written about the property.
Yeah, but like with engagement too, a lot of times it might feel very like one-sided. Like the property manager is reaching out, but she's not getting anything in return. And this is where it even comes back to like building that community. So all of our on-site property managers, they do a monthly newsletter. They definitely have a resident event, if not 2. They will text. They will also call. They will also email. So they are, creating a space where they are communicating often enough to where residents feel as if they can communicate, right? Because if they have a very quiet property manager on site, like they're not going to feel all the warm and fuzzies. Like having your property manager over communicate will never be bad for the property, won't ever be poor for the residents. Like it will only do good. Another thing that our property management does is they have a Facebook page for each property. And that's been huge because I'm in all the Facebook pages because I like to just see what's happening in them, and I've found that a lot of residents will almost swap or barter for stuff because they only found out about it in the Facebook page. The property manager can post about an event going on and they definitely see it in the Facebook page. A lot of people are using Facebook right now. And so knowing that email might not be checked as often as a Facebook page will is huge, right? Because yes, Michael and I and a lot of us work on email every single day, but for a lot of people, they don't. The email is something that they check once a week for potentially a coupon or sale that's going on from the store. Who knows? I don't know. But so really getting creative on the ways that they can communicate. And I actually have one more. Cool. So with that, January, I don't even know how long ago it was, not even that long ago, 2 weeks ago, a property manager and myself did a resident event at 7 a.m. And what we did, right, and this is great communication and engagement, is that we sat outside the gate. And so anybody leaving the gate, to go to work or anything, we offered them coffee or juice or donut. And man, let me tell you how excited these people are when, right, they're on their way to work and they can have coffee or juice or a donut. When you think even outside the box for resident events and ways that you can engage, because it meant a lot to them that we were there and it was cold, actually. It was a cold morning. It was definitely below freezing. Showing that we want to do something like that for them speaks volumes, whether you think it might or not. Hearing everybody just be so grateful that they had one less stop to do on their way to work that day, meant a lot. And for us, it was an hour and it was really easy and I got warm eventually. But
yeah, for that specifically, our on-site manager, she would host events and get really low turnout. I mean, a lot of these times you host events Monday through Friday during work hours. Right? She noticed, on-site noticed that there wasn't a lot of engagement from the community. And so, she reached out to Susie and was hey, Susie's in town. It's hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to come into work early. Right. So she comes in at I think 8 or 9, and she came in at 7 to catch all the residents leaving, right, for going to work. And just that's the way to do it for that specific property.
Yeah. Or one more that was fun. And I swear we'll get to the final one. But for Christmas, she did an I Spy elf event. So it's almost like Elf on the Shelf, except the residents want to find the elf. And they know that, these people are all adults, right? So the elf finding is just fun. But she put it all over the community. And the pictures that she got, because, right, somebody could have just passed it when they left the door, where it's they didn't have to go. They could find it 24/7. It wasn't just during these particular hours. That was a lot of engagement too. So even finding super fun ways for residents is, that's really what it is, right? I talked about it before with maintenance or with the onsite. If you can gamify something, you will win as well. Cool. And then last but not least,
this PR to me is important, obviously, is tracking actuals versus the budget. So looking at all the line items, right? So what we do every October, November timeframe is build a budget for the next year with our property management company, right? So they'll come to us and say, okay, this is what we think that the budget should be. And then Susie and I will look at it line item by line item and say, okay, let's cut back on this or increase that. We'll also look at our pro forma, right? But within reason, right? If expenses are going up because inflation and things like that, we can't constrain the property management company by our pro forma, right? And so we have to make sure that it's within reason with our pro forma as well, right? So tracking the actuals versus the budget and looking at the variance between those two is very, very important from the property management company side of things.
Yeah. And when you have communication throughout the whole entire year, right? Because you talk to them weekly, sometimes you talk to them daily, you definitely see them in person at least once a month. These conversations are easier to have when you see that budget for the next year, because you can be hey, I know that this is how we spent last year. How is it actually going to change? I see that you want to make the change, but tell me the action behind it.
Cool. So that was the 6 KPIs that we think are important to talk to you about, that our property management company tracks and that we follow along with as well. And as Susie kind of mentioned at the beginning of this as well, it's important to know where that data is coming from. So we're going to talk a little bit more about now how you can leverage data and technology for effective KPI tracking. And so as Susie mentioned, it's important to have a solid software tool, right, where you can pull the data for your KPIs, right, in order to be able to make decisions in your multifamily management.
Yeah, like our on-site uses AppFolio. It is very easy for us to like read, interact with. The interface is very simple on our end. I mean, yes, like with anything new, because I'm not going to say it's going to be easy for every single person, but once you get used to it, which if you take time to get used to it, right, that's the big thing too, then it does work for you in your favor.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as Susie mentioned, use AppFolio. It's great. We can pull data from that. Another thing too that we do is I have certain things, and this is a whole nother episode here. We have certain things that get sent to us on the 20th every month. So we usually finalize the financials around the 15th of every single month for the previous month. And then a few days after they're finalized, I have reports sent to us, which include exterior CapEx items, interior CapEx items, tenant tickler, and then resident renewals as well. So I can track CapEx expenditures, how much it's costing to turn a unit, and then also, how many leases that we turned over as well. Another cool thing that we track as well is lease trade-in or trade-out. Basically say, okay, this is what the lease was previously, this is what the new lease is for. So that's a cool kind of thing to track there. And so anyways, we have our property management company set all those up to automatically send to us on the 20th of every month. And so those get sent, we review them, and then that is a primer for another episode we'll have in the future for sure, because I think that's really important, tracking the very minutia detail of all the CapEx dollars that you are spending, making sure that your dollar is going as far as it can.
Absolutely. And so like with all of this data, it's like everybody is a different type of learner. So to be able to like see it in a graph or be able to just see it like differently also does wonders for yourself, right? Because you can just make it easier on yourself when you are analyzing the data, when the data is given to you or can be presented to you in a different way, and helps you like identify for areas of improvement. But along with that, like you can use a lot of this data in your investor reports, right? And so that's why the in data is super important, like for the investor reports, but then also like to go back to the property manager at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year, depending how you want to look at it, and just be like, hey, like the graphs, don't lie. The data doesn't lie. Like we can see what's happening with the property, like, or you can say like, wow, we did a really great job, right? Both conversations can happen and do happen often, but like that's really where just like using the data and analyzing for trends or identifying areas of improvement, like that's where all of this really comes together.
Absolutely. For sure. And the last little piece that we're going to talk about here for technology use is the potential future use of artificial intelligence, right? So using AI as well as machine learning, right, for predictive analytics and automated reporting. And so Susie and I are looking into various different software tools in order to help us track KPIs better and to visualize things better and to make decisions better. So we can find inefficiencies and be able to fix those and ultimately increase NOI and increase the returns for our investors. So I'd like to hear from you, from our adventurous family, from the listeners, what AI tools have you seen people use in multifamily? Comment on this show, comment on our YouTube channel, what you've seen, or just shoot us a message. We'd love to hear from you to really understand what people are using, how they're using AI and ML in order to increase their operations in multifamily. We got some things in the works, and that's what we're going to be focusing on this year. But I'm excited to hear what you all have to say as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just any opportunity to learn is great. But now we're going to go into the fun segment, the multifamily myth buster.
What's that myth?
Yeah, there you go. So our myth for today is your property manager is your asset manager.
They're not?
No, they can't be.
Why not?
So, I mean, we've been in this situation. We've seen this situation before, right? Or, I mean, even actually, we got the feedback like, wow, you two are really involved owners. Like most of the time, the owner just comes out once a year, property's doing fine, then it all works out. And we're like, that is totally okay for them and their investment style. You have an obligation to be an asset manager for your investors, if you have them, I guess, right? Because everybody's situation is different. But at the same time, even as a limited partner, you want to make sure you know who the actual asset manager is, and just like going through this, right? Like they need to be part of your team, but not the lead. So even a situation that we had with our very first property, right? Like, and we're brand new to this. We're like, oh man, right? Because there's so much that we just didn't know yet. And yes, we had a mentor on our team and we had other seasoned people on our team, but like this was Michael and I's first property. Like this was our thing. We had a mentor. We did not have like a boss, but we had walked every unit. We had classified it pretty much from like A to F, and the on-site after, right? Because like even if you close mid-month, like to really get like the full health of the property, it's like a month and a half later. Yes, we still look at that information with that last month, but like to figure out really what's going on. And we found out that the on-site property manager was like redoing B and A units, like new flooring, full painting, new cabinets. I mean, it was crazy. And we were like, this is really scary. And that is just like one example of why your property manager is not your asset manager, right? Because in your plan and everything that you knew, like you knew that you could have saved so much money. We could have saved so much money, like at the very beginning, like if that just wouldn't have happened. And I mean, yes, hindsight is 2020, but this is why it's like super important to be very proactive from the very beginning, even with that property manager. Like I mentioned, with the property manager, they don't have a fiduciary responsibility to the investors, right? Like Michael and I do. We have to make sure that if we say that we're asset managing, that we are actually asset managing.
Yeah. And most of the time, the on-site manager or the regional or the property manager in general has no idea what a syndication is, right? If you syndicated a deal, they don't know what a syndication is. Sometimes they don't even know what a JV is, right? They just think like people with millions and millions of dollars buy these apartments, right? And then we just operate them. It's not how it actually works, right? So yeah, so not only that, but like we also make sure, Susie makes sure that we educate our on-site manager as well as to what a syndication. Hey, we're not the only owners, right?
Yeah,
there are lots of other people, 25, 30, 40 people sometimes involved into each property. And we all pool our money together, right? Explain how a syndication works on a very basic level. So they're like, oh, okay, I get it, right?
Yeah, like, and even explaining them, like, the money is not infinite. Like, if the money runs out, we are like, yes, Michael and I are stressed out, but you are going to be really stressed out when projects have to stop, right? And like, because the property manager is the forward-facing person of the property, like really breaking down what is happening in the back end, like did wonders for us. It was great.
You got to remember that the on-site manager is basically at the tactical level. If you think of military operations, right, you have strategic, operational, and tactical, right? Think about the on-site manager is a tactical level of operations. You think about the regional, right? They're more operational, right? They're overseeing a couple of properties and things like that. And then you, as an asset manager, if you are an asset manager or a lead sponsor or, lead operator, you have the strategic vision of the business plan, right? You write the business plan, and now it's your job to make sure that business plan is being carried out on a day-to-day basis, right? And making sure that there is top-down communication, but also bottom-up communication throughout. You got to remember that as an operator, if you are one, the buck stops with you, right? It's your duty and responsibility to oversee the implementation of that business plan that you created, right? And if you are a limited partner listening to this as well, make sure that, who is the asset manager for the property, making sure that they're not relying just on the property management company, right? And if they're vertically integrated, make sure that there's actually an asset manager who's in charge. It's very, very important. So to bust that myth, your property manager is not your asset manager. So to summarize this podcast here, so we talked about the 6 KPIs that are tracked by our property managers. Hit those again. Number 1 was resident retention rate. Number 2, lease renewal rates. Number 3, resident satisfaction. Number 4, maintenance response time. Number 5, resident communication and engagement. And number 6, actuals versus budget. And then we dove and talked a little bit more about data availability and how crucial it is in order to be able to pull the correct data that you want to pull, the effectiveness of the proper software tools, and then also looking at the future, looking at AI, ML, and how that might play a role in multifamily operations in the future.
Totally. And just, right, like we encourage you, all of our adventurous family, like just to find out what KPIs are tracked by, like if you are in a deal as a limited partner, what their property manager does track or what the operators are tracking, right? I encourage you just like reach out and ask deeper questions so that you can even learn and be a more well-informed passive investor as well. So thank you for joining us today. We can't wait to see you next week.
That's right. So until next time, explore more, adventure awaits.